as the last few years, I will be doing a presentation showing all the great lolcats I found since the last SMWCon. More seriously though, I'll be presenting all the things that happened in the SMW world, or at least in the core SMW world, since the last European SMWCon. And I will also be going over the new features that are coming up into the next release and that are on the roadmap. So I already got a pretty nice introduction, but quickly going over this, I've been a SMW developer since 2009, when I did a Google Summer of Code project with Jeroen. Later that year, I attended one of the first SMW cons, which at that time was called SMW Camp in Karlsruhe, and I must say it grew quite a bit since then. So yeah, I'm currently working for Wikimedia Germany together with a bunch of awesome people, one of which will later on this day give a talk about the project. I'm very much into software craftsmanship and good design of code, and part of this is interoperability and reuse, which is of particular interest here as I'm doing a lot of things with focus on making parts of the Wikidata software interoperable with SMW. And yeah, cats. So first we'll be going a bit over some metrics of the development that happened over the last year. After this, there is a section on infrastructure. I did a few slides on this last year, and this year just so many things happened here that it grew a bit. As you will see, the next release has not really focused on features, but more on making the whole platform more solid. And the infrastructure we gained in our project to support the developers and also to support the community here is very relevant there. The last release of SMW 1.8 came out a bit after the last SMWCon, so we'll do a quick recap here and then have a look at one exciting new feature that Marcus sort of hacked in last minute after the conference. And then perhaps the most fun part of the presentation, which is the new features that are up and coming in the 1.9 release, and then some thoughts on where we could head after that. So, if we look at how many contributors developed in the last year, 20 unique developers contributed to SMW core itself, which gives us a total of 68 developers over the project history. And the open source project aggregate site OLO classifies us as a large active development team in the top 10 of all the projects worldwide. So if you know a bit about open source projects, then you know that the vast majority of them have one contributor. And we have 20, which is phenomenal, and this easily puts us into the top 1% and probably the top 0.1% of all open source projects. And a few of these people are just submitting one patch, but in the last month or so, 2 different people submitted fixes for Postgres support. So these things are definitely very useful, and you're definitely welcome to contribute if you're run into some issue and you fix it for yourself. So currently the maintainers of the project are Marcus, James, the mysterious person, and me. So yeah, I'm not really the lead developer. It's the 3 of us, and the contributors of, well, the other contributors are also very valuable, of course. So if we look at the commits since 2006, these are listed per month, then we see that it's sort of stable. There is a very slight increase, but overall it's pretty stable. And in the last 12 months, there were roughly 1,000 commits. Looking at the number of lines of code we have, it's steadily going up. And in the past 12 months, we gained about 17,000 lines of code. I'm actually wondering where all this code is coming from, but yeah. James is doing really a lot of work. It's sort of hard to keep up with everything he's doing. Go ahead. The color coding is the blue section at the top is actual lines of code. Underneath that you have comments, and the green at the bottom is white or blank lines. So, before I start with the infrastructure section, one of the things that I really like to see improve about the SMW project, and which we've been working on during the last year, is the stability of the platform. We want to make sure there are as few bugs as possible and that we don't end up with regressions in each new release. A lot of people that are doing MediaWiki development sort of have the attitude of, oh, we'll just write something, we won't really test it, and then we'll release it, and if it's broken, somebody will tell us. But in the end, this is of course not really professional behavior, and we want our users to be able to rely on the software working and not perhaps breaking again in the next release. So to that end, we made some improvements to the development process. For the ones of you that are a bit more technical inclined, this will look familiar, which is a screenshot of Jenkins, which is a continuous integration system which runs all our tests whenever somebody makes a change to the code base. And we have this now deployed on the Wikimedia Foundation infrastructure, which means that whenever somebody submits a change to Semantic MediaWiki, we will first review it there, and during this review, Jenkins will run the test, and it will tell us here in the rightmost column if the test passed or not. So this really helps us with the code review, and it also helps contributors that don't know how to run the tests or anything to notice their code is broken when they submit it, and then they can fix it on their own. Of course, Jenkins makes us know that SMW is sort of working on foundation-like infrastructure, which is PHP 5.2. It's using MySQL and some specific configuration. But that's not good enough, since we have users that are using different configurations, different versions of PHP. We have users that are using different databases, and we have users that are using different versions of MediaWiki. And for this, we are also supporting Travis CI, where we have our tests run after every merge. And for these, on every merge, we will run a set of different tests. We will run using different PHP versions, and we will run using different databases. So we're running both with MySQL and with SQLite. And this screenshot is about 2 months old. And since then, we also added support for running the tests against MediaWiki 1.19 and all the other releases we support at the current point. So this means that, well, perhaps some of you will remember, if you're using SQLite, that SMW 1.8 was announced as supporting SQLite. And it did at some point, but before it got released, it got broken, and nobody of us noticed, since we were not running on SQLite. And then a month after the release or so, we had gotten a bunch of bug reports saying, oh, it doesn't work. And then we fixed it after the release. So if you're running the latest version of 1.8, SQLite will work, but in the initial release of 1.8, it doesn't. And having this kind of tooling prevents these kind of unfortunate slip-ups. So for the developers, you can also just get all the information of the tests that are running and the bugs that occur on Travis CI. One last slide in this section. We also now support coveralls.io, which is a service that tracks our code coverage of our unit tests. So we know how well we're doing. As you can see, we're only at 16% of the current point. This is up from about 0 last year. So we're making steady progress there. And here we can also track which commits change the coverage in some way. Oh, one last slide here, I guess. This is actually something I'm very excited about. As you all know, installing MediaWiki extensions isn't sort of the most modern experience. You have to go download the extension and then include it into your local settings file. And if you have multiple extensions, you need to figure out if all the versions work together and if you got all the dependencies. For instance, SMW at this point requires a library called parm processor, formerly called validator. So whenever you're installing SMW, you also need to get this version. And this is a bit of a pain, especially if you get more components, which we will if we want to be interoperable with Wikidata. So one solution here is a tool developed by the PHP BB guys. This is an open source forum for their plugin installation system, and it's called Composer. And it's a command line tool which allows you to install dependencies of a certain package. And at this point, we just support this for in SMW itself. So if you get if you download SMW and you in this directory run Composer install, then the dependencies of SMW will be installed there, and they will be automatically loaded for you without you having to figure out anything on top of this. This is, of course, still very preliminary because this is SMW supporting this kind of installation. And in order to be able to use this more broadly, MediaWiki itself needs to support this. And the various extensions to MediaWiki that you want to be able to install with it. So this is something we'll be looking in more during the next year, and hopefully we'll end up with a script you can just run that says install SMW, and it will do everything for you without having to bother with all the technical details there. Yeah, this is a screenshot of a public repo where the SMW package is registered, so you can get it via the system today and basically say install SMW. So this is basically a quick recap of SMW 1.8. Just a reminder of the compatibility changes in 1.8 in case you did not upgrade yet. We finally dropped support for MediaWiki 1.16, which was long overdue. And we added support for 1.19 and 1.20. We also added support for PHP 5.4. And we added support for SQLite, or we sort of did a month afterwards. So these features are new things in SMW 1.8 that got presented last year. So if you haven't seen these yet, look at the release notes or look at the talk of last year. So we had the SQL Store 3 with performance improvements and other goodies in there. We had some improvements to the UI of Special Ask. We also had some other UI improvements and added some new capabilities to our web API. But what was not presented, since it wasn't in at this point yet, is that SMW now stores, as of 1.8, now stores information about queries, inline queries. So whenever you put the inline query in a page, SMW will be creating a sub-object for this query. It will link it to the page via the hasQuery property, and the sub-object itself will have the following properties, denoting its size, format, size, and depth. And since this information is now in SMW, you can do the fun thing, which is querying for all your queries and get some idea of which queries are in a wiki, and perhaps spot some of the most expensive ones. So a number of things you can do with this. Just some fun examples are you can get the total number of queries in your wiki pretty easily. You just pick one of the properties, and so if you want the number of pages that have queries, you use the property that points to the sub-objects. If you want to get the number of queries that have the count format, then you just filter on the count format. And if you want to get all the pages with the query with the size that's bigger than 10, you can use the sub-property thing notation or whatever this is called. to get that result. And you can also just get the 10 largest queries together with their size and some other information in your wiki, which then can end up looking something like this. Any questions so far? So the question was if I could tell a bit more about new features in the SQL Store tree. And this is basically an improvement on our older SQL Store 2, aimed at performance mainly. So I could go more into this, but this is just technical explanation of how we're doing it. And it's really mainly performance, and also adding some new capabilities for getting statistics in a efficient way, which is now in the latest release actually used by some new functionality, which I will be showing later. Oh, go ahead.
I'm wondering about query size. Is that a measure of the result size?
No, this is all this information is based on the query definition itself. Marcus, can you explain what the query size is?
Yeah. The query size basically is the number of separate conditions you state. So if you say you want something in the category A and the category B, it could be 2. If you would say something is in a has a property value of a certain property, that would add 1. If you further say that this value should be in the category X, that would also add 1. So it's like complexity is the size of how many conditions are involved in the query.
So moving on to SMW 1.9, again, we'll start with compatibility, so you know if you can upgrade already or not. We dropped support for MediaWiki 1.17 and 1.18, and we added support for 2 of the newer releases. So we still do support the long-term support 1.19 release, and we'll continue to do so for a while, I guess. We completely dropped SQL Store 2 in this release, so if you're still dependent on it, you should migrate to the newer version. We also dropped support for PHP 5.2, which was very long overdue, considering this PHP version hasn't been supported anymore for years. And we added support for version 5.5. Some new features, and these are mainly slides that got contributed by James. So he added a special page listing concepts. I think this is a pretty cool feature, which is on the special page statistics, which shows a lot of information on your wiki, such as how many pages you have, and these kind of things. And now there is a new section with semantic information or semantic statistics that lists how many properties you have, how many of them are used, and how many sub-objects you have, and all these kind of things. And yeah, this makes use of some of the new capabilities by the SQL Store tree. And if I'm not mistaken, this will only appear if you're actually using a recent version of MediaWiki, since it's using a hook that James added. So you probably need the latest release of MediaWiki. On the special properties page, a new search form got added where you can filter down on the properties listed there, which is very useful if you have tons of properties. Some new permission got added for the SMW admin page. So you have now more fine-grained access control here. The stat recurring event parser function, which I actually don't know anything about, now apparently creates sub-objects. I'm not sure what it did before, but yeah. this slide is a bit out of order. It should have been behind the statistics one. And it's, since it's pretty much the same thing, it's an extension to our API, which we were already providing some information on SMW via the API, where you could find out how many properties we had. But now you can also find out a bunch of additional information, such as, for instance, here, the number of queries. And here, well, it's a bit of the slide, but there is a format count section, which then lists the total number of queries that use the list format and any other format you're using in your wiki. And there is this very awesome SMW wiki out there called Wiki Apiary, which tracks MediaWiki extensions and their usage across different MediaWiki installations. So it also tracks MediaWiki installations themselves, and it hits their APIs periodically, retrieving information about how many pages they have and how many users they have, and it grabs this over time, which is very interesting. And now, if you have a semantic wiki, then it will also get this information, and it will grab the amount of properties and the amount of queries and these kind of things over time as well. Which is very interesting as well if you're looking for examples of SMW wikis, since it has a list of SMW wikis, and you can sort it by the total number of properties you have, in which case you immediately have the biggest SMW wikis out there, or at least the biggest public SMW wikis. A completely new API module that was added is Browse by Subject, which allows you to get the information for one particular subject, and this is in the same format as the information you would get via the Ask API. Also, some improvements were made to just crashing. So this is performance related. So the page's properties, wanted properties, and unused properties should now all be faster, especially on big wikis. And James added some feature where you can see the status of the concept cache for concepts on their pages. So when is this going to happen? I'm hoping that we can have a release by the end of this year, since it's been already quite a while since our last release, and I think we generally should not go this long without having any release, since there are quite some exciting new features that have been added quite a while ago, but people are not able to use them yet since it's not released yet. And this includes things in semantic result formats, for instance, which is now waiting to be released depending on SMW. So some things that are planned, and this is sort of really my wish list. I think other people will have additional ideas and thoughts there. So what I'd like to see happen is that we further increase the stability of our platform, make it really more solid, and also improve the extensibility so people can more easily build on top of it. And maintainability is a very important point in that we don't want any regressions to show up or have to do a lot of work to prevent this. So for the long-term future of the project, it's very important to get this point right. And these are sort of the goals, and means to do this are basically improving the code base, adding additional tests, making clear boundaries. These are all just very technical means in how to achieve these ends that are important to the users. One particular point is less binding to MediaWiki itself. I think MediaWiki has a number of problems, but without going into this, one effect you can see of our dependence on MediaWiki, or very close dependence, is that in the compatibility lists, MediaWiki is always listed, and we're always only supporting a small range of MediaWiki versions. And given that most of our code could theoretically work without MediaWiki, this does not make much sense. If we separate our code away from MediaWiki to some extent, then we'll be able to support a much wider range of MediaWiki versions and not have to drop support for older versions the whole time. And of course, well, the last two slides, which are after this, are about interoperability and reuse, in particular with the Wikidata project. So, as part of the Wikidata project, well, the software for the Wikidata project, which is called Wikibase, has some amount of overlap with what SMW is doing. And for the parts where it overlaps, it makes sense to share the things that are really the same. It doesn't make sense for both projects to write the exact same thing and then have to maintain both. So for developing these things, it's a lot easier if we can share this code and don't need to maintain both. And as part of this, I created a re-implementation of the Ask Query language, just the objects describing this language for use in the Wikibase software. And this is very much based on SMW. So we're very thankful that SMW here already had figured out how to generally do this. And we then now created a more clean implementation of this, which can then also be used by SMW at some point. And important here is that it's a clean standalone PHP library. It does not depend on MediaWiki. This is also important for people that want to develop on top of it, since if you want to extend the capabilities of the Ask language now, you can just hire a PHP developer and they will not need to know MediaWiki, they will not need to know SMW, they can just look at this thing and not have to bother with a million other things. This library has basically 100% task coverage, so it's very solid and is likely to have an extremely low amount of bugs, if any at all. And there is actual technical documentation available for this library, which is not currently the case in SMW for this component. So some features that this would enable is JSON API. Right now, if you want to specify a query to SMW via the API, you need to use this wiki text form of the Ask language, which is nice if you're doing inline queries. But if you're doing this via the API with some tool where you dynamically build the queries, then it really does not make sense. And then you want to be able to use the actual objects and use a JSON API, which this library actually facilitates. It also gives interoperability with Wikibase out of the box, since it's using the same objects. And one very exciting possibility is in Wikibase, we will want a visual query builder so people can construct their queries in a user-friendly way without having to poke at Wikitext syntax. And this is a difficult thing to create, but we sort of have to. And once this is done, and it's built on top of this Ask library, then SMW will sort of be able to steal this from Wikibase and also use it. So this will be extremely nice and a huge improvement over interfaces such as Special Ask, which at the moment just allow you to add some parameters, but don't help you with constructing the actual query conditions or the printouts. So perhaps this can happen in SMW 1.11, I really don't know. Sort of depends on some things. But before this happens, there is another library which falls into the same category. It overlaps with Wikibase in what needs to be done there. The advantages are sort of similar to the ones listed before. Also JSON API, interoperability, and it's not just interoperability with Wikibase. It's, since this code is not Wikibase specific, it's you can use it general purpose. So, and on top of this, we're using we've created UI editing widgets in the Wikidata project. So if you have an entity page there, and you added some information, then you get a widget that allows you to enter a date or something. And these widgets are built on top of this library. And again, we would be able to use these and share them between the projects. So that could be useful for interfaces such as semantic forms and the like. And perhaps this can happen in SMW 1.10. Again, no promises. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm really out of time, but I think 2 more questions or so is possible.
Yeah. I guess one or two questions from the audience. Okay, I'm going to you. Hold on.
No, it's just a comment. I was thinking if you want to inform about the Google Plus community to make sure that
yeah,
everybody's-
that's an excellent point. So I forgot about this. This fits in the infrastructure section, but then aimed at users. I did not put it in there since this got created after I created the slides. We now have a new Google Plus community, and in almost a week or so it got over 100 members. So if you're on Google Plus, I recommend you join this. It's a great place to get to know about what other people are doing. With SMW, you can easily keep up to date with new releases of extensions or new features that are people announcing there early. And of course, we also have a Twitter account, Semantic MW. So follow that one if you want to stay up to date with releases and stuff. So I think we're out of time now.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay,
So,
thanks for your attention.